this could be a very significant issue when you combine the question of whether something meets the extant international definition of torture with these practices being employed against or for children in the U.S. I'm a person who hears voices, and I'm a person who was identified as such when I was 8 years old. I spent 8 years of my time growing up on neuroleptic medication. I was hospitalized 7 times. 5 of those were against my will. And the first 2, I was probably too young to know anything about what it was. I was trying to do as far as resisting. It was only probably for the last 3 years of that time that I think one can easily look to a question of the use of state power, and only then because I was so actively trying to raise my rights. The issues were present the whole time, but it's much more difficult to force attention to be called onto them. At the beginning of this window of time, I was an adolescent. I had run into a situation, as often happens, where there's conflict in the family. And what often happens when there's conflict in the family and one person is identified as having a mental illness is that treatment is sought for that person, and that treatment is sought for me to resolve the conflict. During these hospitalizations, I was deemed too young to be entitled to access to any rights at all. I was once restrained by 5 people for demanding a hearing on a writ of habeas corpus I attempted to write out for myself. But I'm not really here to talk about things like that. As an adolescent, I was held incommunicado, prevented from accessing counsel, prevented from reaching out to allies who might be able to help me while I was being detained. But I'm not here to talk to you about that, because the standing law, as it is in the United States of America and the state of Colorado, sees no problem with that. I'm here to talk to you instead about what happens when the standing law does see a necessary access to rights situation, and yet the person who's trying to assert those rights is felt to have a mental illness. So after I got out of all of these hospitalizations, I was in a program where the state basically came out to my house. They managed the family that I was in, and they managed me. I was still asserting that I didn't want to be taking these medications. I was no longer detained. I didn't have that to rail against. But it turns out that neuroleptic medication isn't just whatever it is as a medication. It's an agent that blocks dopamine receptors in the brain, and newer ones block dopamine and serotonin receptors. The dopamine system in the human brain is related to reward anticipation, the experience of pleasure, the experience of joy, the ability to activate your muscles. An intervention in this system is not just an intervention about whatever is felt to be going on there that is not well understood medically. It's an intervention against the whole personality of a human being by a chemical agent. And what was going on is I was telling the state that I wanted none of it, and the state was telling me that I had very little choice. Eventually, I was able to convince them, and in fact they record in the records, that I was ineligible for any sort of forcible treatment and that I had the legal right to refuse it. When that happened, they resorted to another tactic. It's frequently explained to family members that if a person is refusing treatment, there's one sure way to get it. To claim that that person is doing something which necessitates a forcible treatment. It could be as simple as saying somebody turned furniture over or was yelling out of control. In my own case, I was accused of battering my own mother. Now, this is a situation that, like when my younger hospitalizations took place, I was faced with a desire to hold me and to force me to accept this modification to my very human essence. Only this time, because I had already gotten them to acknowledge that the legal criteria for forcible use of medication was not met in my case, they decided to take those allegations that a family member makes and run them through the criminal process instead, feeling that that would provide them access. Naturally, the first thing I did was attempt to assert my right to a trial and demand it. But as with before, I was told that if I attempted to do so, I would very likely be attached to the system for the rest of my life when I turned 18 for requesting a jury trial. I was told that if I attempted to do so, my family situation would probably unravel and I would probably be abused, and that no one would intervene. And I was told that whatever I did, it wouldn't matter, because I was a person with mental illness who wouldn't be perceived as credible. In the end, I tried to find a way around it. I tried to reach out for help. It turned out the ability to call for allies didn't really matter, because sometimes there are so few to be found. And I will admit, it was a situation at the time where trying to prove it myself would have been incredibly difficult. So, after I was threatened with all of these various things, I was threatened with the use of force upon me by my family. I was threatened with being beaten. I was threatened with having the rights of an adult taken from me when I turned 18. I agreed to waive that right. And I don't know. I'm sorry, sometimes I get really emotional. It seems like this time I'm doing it monotone, but I walked into court and I spoke the words "no contest" to abusing my own mother. And I'm not going to tell you exactly why this was done, other than to say that I have an admission from the folks who did it that they knew that the allegation was false and that the allegation was from someone who was implying to make them. I'd rather just let you hear their own reasoning for what they did do.
This is a mental health issue. This isn't about crime. This is a mental health issue. It always has been a mental health issue. I just need, if you guys can help me maintain leverage, because I always need a young person to have, if I have a baseball bat or a 2x4, we'll call it magistrate call or flat, to just remind a young person that I need you to stay focused on what's in front of you. I need you to stay focused on your treatment plan, and everything's going to smooth over. Because if you don't, then one of these things are going to go whack on your head. Okay?
That was the man from the state who made sure I entered the plea after he decided that he couldn't force treatment on me any other way. And this was the person who had sought that option as an alternative to find a way to force me into treatment. At the end of the day, it's not a question of the quality of the procedures that are available. It didn't matter whether I had a theoretical right to go to trial, or whether I wasn't even allowed to call a lawyer or use the words habeas corpus without being restrained. The same thing happened in both situations. And it happened because, as a person who hears voices, it was felt that I needed to be corrected, that this phenomenon in me needed to be changed. That not only would my dopamine systems be altered, but that I would find that anhedonia that can come from these medications, the inability to experience pleasure or joy, that I would be largely sedated, because it was felt that I needed it. At the end of the day, it's the same fundamentally as corporal punishment. It's even compared to corporal punishment by the person who was seeking it being done, at least an analogy. And that's not even acceptable as a solution to a criminal case. I don't know why it's okay to do that on someone like me over my wishes, simply because of the fact that the structure of my thought process is different than that of some other folks. And I think the fact that it didn't matter whether or not I met the legal criteria, that there was always a way to be found, no matter how stringent they were, goes to show that it's not about protections, it's not about defenses, it's not about procedures. It's about the horrors that one human being can do upon another when they think they're doing something that's good. Every single month in my chart, it is recorded that I requested it stop. This is before and after that plea. And it's after those hospitalizations. But no one thought that that assertion mattered. I don't know why this is considered a political issue. I don't know why this is considered a controversial issue. When a human being says, "You are hurting me, please stop," and the answer of men of state is to compare their actions to the use of a bludgeon, a truncheon, a baseball bat, 2x4, then I believe we have crossed the formal definition of torture. And when that is something that can be easily admitted by a state under a theory of good that does not address the fact that a human being who's asserting a valid desire is being entirely ignored, requires the attention of the international community. And I implore all of you to think very, very carefully about what it means to make a decision for another human being, that you will enter their bodies and you will modify their thought process. I may be a materialist, but I'll use the word soul. It's one of the most terrible responsibilities of state, if it's ever acceptable. And I think it's clear that it can't be. Because at the end of the day, the fact that you identify something as an illness is insufficient in itself to justify the use of force. And if you make it a criminal matter, I believe it's already well established under international law that corporal punishment is not acceptable.